welcoming you here to your Women's Fund Village Plaza, where we come together to do something which is absolutely essential. We come to put on our gender lenses and focus on things that are really important. And as I've been saying this morning, I am fired up, I am energized and magnetized by today's topic. And I know I am representing many, 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 many of you here today who feel exactly the same way. From what is a little bit of an inkling to a feeling about something that's going on that you don't feel is right, to where it becomes common knowledge, is a quantum leap. And that's what we want from today. We want a little boost to quantum leap, to understanding, to all of you connectors who are here in the Women's Fund Village Plaza today, because what you learn, you will be able to absorb and you'll be able to share. And connections are important, so we're going to keep on using them. I want to thank all of you who are here today. Too many to enumerate. Community partners, Jamie, Big Brothers, Big Sisters. We have people from PACE, from Christie House, from V-Day. We have people from Women's Funding Network nationally here. We have people from the FBI, the State Attorney's Office, Judicial Courts, Florida Clinicians for Climate Action. We have so many amazing people here today. FSU Young Parents Project has always been such an important one. Please say hello to everybody and keep on communicating. Thank you for being here. We have so many amazing board members. We have 20 strong, powerful, break a sweat women. We accept men on our board, but right now 20 women who are working so hard to further the collective wisdom and growth of your Women's Fund Miami-Dade, and we thank each and every one of them for being here. And then next slide, the fuel. Some of you have been really generous in if you have the economic ability to fuel this organization, which is your organization, bless your hearts, it's really necessary. Of course, no cars can go without the gasoline, and your Women's Fund is no exception. So we have large programs, we have small programs, whatever fits. Our team is here to help you, to help us, help ourselves. So this particular Impact Collaborative, and every single one, is fueled by 1 Billion Rising and the Scale Family Foundation, who are also really involved in V-Day, right, Roz? So we thank them for their fuel. This is also fueled by one of Miami's fantastic leaders. Her name is Norma Jean Abraham, and the Anthony R. Abraham Foundation, who are our pillar sponsorship for one of our 4 pillars, this one, Freedom from Violence. And we thank Norma Jean and her family foundation for all that they do. So onward we go. This is, me with my expressive, funny face, with our brilliant first-time female mayor of Miami-Dade County, Daniela Levine Cava, and our City of Miami Mayor, Francis Suarez, who joined forces with the Women's Fund and all of the people that there I am representing to present an important campaign on May 28th, which is National Heat Awareness Day. Why am I talking about it here? Because an Impact Collaborative just like this one last August brought incredible, important information to the fore that the experts there then helped to translate to the city, to the county, and into policy and into this public awareness campaign that you see here. So we come here because we need to bond, we need community, we need to share information, but there's often something that then comes out of it and we can do about it. Go ahead, Viv, next slide. Without further ado, the genius rich knowledge that we have here at this Impact Collaborative today is going to be focused and centered by Dr. Kathryn Nowotny. Kathryn, thank you so much. Please take it away.
Yes, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here this morning. I'm really, really excited about this panel. And there's going to be some amazing speakers today. If you could just go ahead and start the slideshow, go to the next slide. Thank you. So what I'm going to do today is kind of set the stage and talk about the scope of women's incarceration and the scope of women's trauma and how that leads to incarceration. So it's showing the numbers, right, the data. So first of all, this is, what our prison and jail populations look like in the United States, right? We have about 2.4 million people behind bars on any given day, with over half of those people in state prisons, right? So people that are serving a year or more sentence for the states. Jails are a relatively smaller part, right? On any given day, there's about 600,000 people in jails. But 11 million people are admitted to jails every year, right? So jails have a lot of people cycling in and out. And what I want to, a couple of points I want to make about this, why jails are so important, is because, as you can see, the majority of people that are in jail have not been convicted of a crime, right? They're pre-adjudication or pre-trial, most often because they can't afford bail, right? And this is what it looks like overall. Women actually, in terms of the overall incarcerated population, make up only 10% of this population, right? So they're small, which means they often get overlooked. And most policies, most practices, most programs are focused on men. But there's very specific gendered processes and gender needs for women in this population. And actually, for over half of women are actually are actually in jails. Right? So this pie looks really different when we look at women. Most women are in jail. Most women are in jail because they cannot afford bail. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. When you look at the growth, right? So everyone has seen the graph showing that mass incarceration has just grown exponentially, right? Over the past, few decades. And even though women are smaller than men, their rate of growth is actually much faster. So they outpace men's growth, 2 to 1, right? And even now, as our overall incarcerated population is decreasing, it's been decreasing since about 2015, women are actually continuing to increase, and particularly in jails, their numbers are increasing. They're still one of the fastest growing subpopulations of people who are incarcerated. Can you go to the next slide? And of course, this burden of incarceration is not equally shared by everyone in our society. So, there's lots of very rich Black feminist tradition that, clearly links our sort of logics of mass incarceration to, historical systems of racial control that I think is important to talk about. And, this slide kind of really clearly shows that relationship. So this was based on an analysis of people born in the year 2001. So people that are kind of coming of age into young adulthood now. So people born in 2001, 1 in 3 Black men can expect to be incarcerated in their lifetime, a full 1/3, right? For Black women, it's 1 in 18. And so you can see how that compares to all women and white women overall. Next slide, please. And so I wanted to bring back just a look in Florida, thinking about the scope here in Florida. When we look at the rate of women's incarceration in Florida, it's higher than it is for the US average, and it's higher than every single high income country in the world. So next slide, please. So why is this important, right? So why are women incarcerated? Like, what's going on here? So we know from criminological research, right, that women are largely incarcerated because of their trauma, right? In criminology and medical sociology, we refer to this as the criminalization of women's trauma, right? Women's pathways theory, sort of the state of research shows that women who are incarcerated, this was actually data from a study that I did with women in jail. We interviewed women in jail. We collected all kinds of data from them about their experiences. And you can look here at if we look at their prevalence, right, of trauma and adversity, and thinking about these intergenerational changes. I know we're gonna have someone talk about children in a minute, right? Among women in jail, 70% had a parent or caregiver who was incarcerated when they were a child, right? 60% witnessed violence among their caregivers, right? And then they themselves, have seen, or have experienced high rates of intimate partner violence, as well as child sexual and physical assault, right? And so we often see this very clear trajectory where women are experiencing trauma. Maybe girls are running away from home. Girls in juvenile detention facilities are more likely to be confined for running away from home than boys, right? And so we're like literally criminalizing running away from home when girls are trying to leave these abusive situations, right? And once you're in the system, we know it's really hard to get out of that system, right? Once you've sort of been funneled in and labeled. Next slide, please. The other consequence of this is that, of course, violence and trauma, especially when untreated, is associated with things like substance abuse disorders, PTSD, and serious mental illness like depression, anxiety, and schizoaffective disorders. And so we heard lots of stories from women where, through talking to them about their lives, they quickly came to the realization that, linking their life together, that abuse led to mental trauma coping, right? Where they would start hearing voices as a way to comfort themselves, right? And you sort of see these real clear pathways to to mental illnesses, and then to substance use as a way to coping, right? With trauma, with stress, with living on the streets, and so forth. And of course, those lead to behaviors that we criminalize, like drug use, like truancy, like illegal camping, like sex work, right? All of these sort of, kind of survival crimes. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned before, right, most women are in jail. Most women are in jail pre-trial or pre-adjudication, mostly because they cannot afford bail. And so one of the things I think, we can focus on, I just want to give, is thinking about bail reform. And this is a graph showing, right, if you look at the yellow bar, the median bail amount in the United States is $10,000. And among women who are detained pre-trial, their average annual income is only $11,000. So we think about like that disproportionality between the bail that we set and the amount of income that women have to pay that bail, and it's criminal, right? Next slide, please. So, thinking about like what can you do? There are several national bailout efforts, right? If you have the means to support those efforts, particularly on Mother's Day. So National Bailout is an organization that was started by Black women for Black women to bail out Black women on Mother's Day. There's also some local efforts about Florida Justice Mother's Day bailout to help women get home to their children. Of course, LEAP, right? Reentry organizations, which we're going to hear from, are very important. As I already mentioned, since women are such a small but important part, they don't have nearly the amount of services, right, that we do for men. And then, 80% of women who are incarcerated are mothers, right? So we are incarcerating parents. We're incarcerating parents of minor children who are oftentimes serving sentences along with their mothers. And so, there's organizations that help children with incarcerated parents. And then on the final slide, you could switch one more. Yes, I would be remiss if I didn't talk about also pregnancy, right? So almost 4% of women who are admitted to prisons and jails are pregnant. So, many women deliver babies while incarcerated. And of course, here in Florida, we had the horrible situation where a woman named Tammy gave birth alone in a jail cell, right, without any medical treatment. This was just a couple of years ago. And so there's been some local legislation that I think we should all support as well, particularly these dignity for incarcerated women bills to make sure that women, my opinion, women should not be incarcerated while they're pregnant, but at least we could do is get them adequate medical services, right? And I wanted to give a shout out to Minnesota, which became the first state to ban the separation of babies from mothers who give birth in prison. And they also have a really well-developed doula project as well. So I'm going to end there, and hopefully I've sort of set the big picture for the wonderful stories that we're going to hear from the other panelists. Thank you.
You have set the stage, and as we all commented before, between every stat and behind every stat are a lot of human stories, and we're going to hear some of those today. How this webinar is going to work, some of you have been here before, welcome to those who have not. We're going to conduct 3 polls during this Impact Collaborative. That's one of the ways that we're asking you to interact. Please say hello to each other, communicate in the chat, share resources, etc. Please post your questions as well in the Q&A, and please fill out our survey at the end, because all of these are ways that we connect with you, because this is your Women's Fund, right? The ties that bind. So I am going to go quickly on. We usually give 2 minutes to each of our panelists to introduce themselves, but we get to do whatever we want to do. And our first panelist is going to take a role of a little bit of a speaker. Roz from V-Day is going to be generous and tell us a little bit of her story, so it'll be a little bit longer. Roz, we want to hear from you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. My name is Roslyn Smith, and I'm a survivor of the criminal injustice system. First, I would like to thank the Women's Fund for having me on this panel today. And I am so honored to share this space with all the panelists and all the participants who are here. Also, my tremendous appreciation and love go out to V-Day for believing in me and supporting me on my journey of reentry after serving 39 years in prison. So my story begins as a young girl growing up. I was raised by my grandmother for 11 years. My mother was a heroin addict, and she had 6 children, and each one of her children were placed in different households of relatives. My sister and I and my brother, we lived with my grandmother and my great aunt. And for 11 years, I had an idyllic childhood. I went out to play, I went to school, I had fun. We went on family trips and everything. And I didn't see my mother for those whole 11 years. So a turning point came in her life where she decided, because she was with this guy, one of her new boyfriends, she decided that she could get money for having her kids from welfare. So she decided to take us back. When my great grandmother gave me the news, I was very upset because I was happy. I didn't want to go live with her. And she came and picked us up like 2 weeks later, and my whole life changed. I didn't know my mother was addicted to drugs until later on when I was older, but she was very abusive towards me, physically abusive, mentally abusive, emotionally abusive on every level. And I really didn't understand it. I felt like mother's supposed to love you, mother's supposed to protect you, mother's supposed to care about you. And I was not receiving this from her. And I became very depressed and I became very angry. And I started running away from home. I just didn't know how to cope with all of these new things that were going on in my life. So I ended up in the streets, doing whatever I needed to do to survive. I slept in basements, I slept in abandoned buildings, I slept on park benches. And during this time, I also started using drugs. I started drinking a lot, smoking marijuana, and using cocaine just to numb myself because I didn't know how to cope with this. So at the age of 7, I eventually went back home because I couldn't survive on the streets. I was raped while I was living in a basement, and I went back home. And when I went back home, my mother sent me away. She put me under what is called the PINS petition, person in need of supervision in New York. So I was sent into a group home, and in the group home, I went to school and I felt like I was getting myself together. And during that time, I was working 2 jobs. I had my first job working for a printing company, and then I had another job working in Subway sandwich shop. And then I had stopped going to school. So the group home told me that, well, you can't do that anymore. You have to either sign up for GED classes. You can't work, because I was trying to work and save money to get my own apartment. So I was upset about it, and nobody really explained the whole process to me. So I was making money, I was saving money, and I was looking about, thinking about my future and having my own place and being productive So I was angry and I was like, no, I'm not quitting my jobs. And this is what I'm doing, and this is helping me. So I ended up asking my mother, could I go back home? And I went back home with her. And that was a disaster. So in the next at this point in my life, I was about 16 years old. And when I went back home with her, the abuse continued. The money I had saved up, she was telling me I had to pay room for rent. So I was paying her. I couldn't commute back and forth to work. And everything just spiraled out of control. And I ended up in the same situation that I came from. On the night of, I ended up just hanging out in the streets again, smoking marijuana, drinking, just doing nothing with my life. And I was very depressed. So in late August of 1979, I was hanging out with my girlfriends, and one of my girlfriends was pregnant at the time, and she wasn't feeling good. So she decided she wanted to go in the house early. And her sister, which was my co-defendant, asked me, I'll walk you home. So as we were walking home, we got into a conversation, and she was like, you have any money? I want to get high some more. Let's go, get some more marijuana. Let's go get some more beer. And I was like, I don't have any money. Oh, do you know any people that, have any money? So I was like, yeah, there's this older couple that lives across the street from me, and I could go in there and tell them, some story and get some money for them. So what happened eventually was that we went into my apartment building, and we went to um the the people who lived across the hall, Mr. and Mrs. Fight. And I told this big lie that my mother was fighting and I needed money. And when she opened the door and let me in, my co-defendant went in there and started ransacking her. And they got into a fight. And eventually the outcome was that 2 people were killed. I take responsibility for what I did. And it was a hard road for me to understand how this could happen to me, that 2 innocent lives were taken in the process. And this will forever be with me. And this is why I do the work that I do, to understand that nobody, no child says, I want to be a criminal. I want to be a murderer. I want to go to prison. There are things in our life that happen that impact us so much, the trauma that we face, especially in Black and Brown communities, and especially for girls and women. The trauma that we face sometimes is not acknowledged, is not seen, is not heard, and is not attended to. And the impact of being with my mother for those years and the things that she did to me and the life that I lived because of that impacted me in such a way that I didn't even realize that I was traumatized. And all of this led back into me feeling that I was alone in the world, that nobody cared. It was a dog eat dog world, and I had to do what I had to do in order to survive. And that meant not caring about human life, not caring about my life. And it was just a dark place in my life. And my story is not unique. This happens on many levels to many girls and many women who have been traumatized and don't have the resources to go to, don't have the support of the systems that are supposed to protect us. We talk about violence, and what we don't talk about are the systems that create violence in our lives as well. Going into foster care, going into group homes, these systems traumatize us even more. The hospitals that we go to, if you're a drug addict and you go to a hospital, your child is taken from you and the family is traumatized even more. So all of these things, you know, add up. But getting back to my story is that I did 39 years in prison. And in prison, I learned to heal myself. And it was the older women in prison who were in there that taught me this, because I felt like nobody loved me. Nobody cared about me. Nobody was concerned if I lived or died. And for the first 10 years of my prison sitting, I continued to medicate myself with drugs and not do anything and not see what was going on in my life and how I got to this point. But then something turned, something just, a spark started. And this was through the older women that were in prison who said that, you know, Roz, you're smart. You can be a mentor to people. You can, you know, your story is important to tell. You know, there are other women here that have the same stories, and that you could connect with them and you could connect, unite, and you're not alone, and that we love you. And this changed my whole life. And I ended up, you know, getting my college education, being a mentor to other women, starting programs in prison. Eve Ensler came into prison and decided that she wanted to have a writing group, and that also changed my life very much. And I'm so grateful to her for that, because if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't even be in the place that I am now. Because when I came home, it was hard to find work, it was hard to find a job. And she created a position for me in V-Day as a program manager to highlight incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women's issues. And I have been so blessed in my journey. And although it was a hard journey, I'm very thankful and I'm very grateful for all the people who have helped me along the way. And I don't want to take up too much time, but
You didn't. You're filling us, Roz. You're filling us.
And thank you so much.
It's a blessing that you're here to help us to see things that we need to see, and stories move mountains. So one of the things you alluded to, we're going to ask Mahlia. I know it's to take a deep breath. I think collective gratitude to you, Roz, from everybody here. And then now we're going to transition into the quick 2-minute introductions of our other panelists. And Mahlia's got some things to tell us about some of those systems. Mahlia, welcome. Thanks so much for being here. You're still on mute, my dear. There you go.
Roz, thank you so much for sharing, 'cause I know that's really hard. So as I run an organization called LEAP, Ladies Empowerment and Action Program, and we are one of the few organizations that provide reentry services. We're just for women, and that's because Kathryn talked a lot about the statistics, but in Florida, only 14% of women in state prison receive any sort of programming at all. And the limited programming that does exist is not gender responsive. We know that most women are in prison because of trauma, and that is not addressed. So LEAP started off providing education and workforce readiness and entrepreneurship. And we learned that there could be 1 million jobs available to women coming out of prison, which there are not. But if the underlying cause of why they went to prison was not addressed, giving them jobs would be of no use. And so I feel that it's important, before you talk about, well, jobs or housing, to really think about the whole picture, because addressing any one thing without a more holistic vision is not going to ensure success for the women coming out. So over the years that we've been in business, 13 years now, we've evolved from just providing entrepreneurial training, workforce readiness, to also providing that trauma-informed addiction programming, providing supported housing and supported employment when the women get out. And we've really seen a big difference in outcomes. And I just want to briefly contrast my sort of story with Roslyn's and the possibilities when we take trauma and violence against women into account. My grandmother grew up in an orphanage, got pregnant by somebody that worked there when she was 15, was in a very violent relationship, and she killed her husband. And this was in 1970, I believe. And it was small town justice. She called the police on herself. I've killed my husband. They put her in jail. Everybody came forward and basically said, he's violent. This is why she did it. And basically they let her out. They did not file charges against her. She went to work. She ended up in a loving relationship. I ended up going to Georgetown Law School because she was able to help pay for me to attend college and law school, and end up working at the prosecutor's office, specializing in domestic violence cases. And of course, being part, even for a short time, of the criminal justice system. And as Roslyn said, the injustice system. I didn't last long, but I just want to point out how things can change when we really look at the violence committed against women and consider at what point does a person go from being a victim to being labeled a criminal. And I think if we look at that, we could see more stories. Like I said, my grandmother's, it was not a societal change. It was just small town justice. But I think it illustrates the possibilities. Roslyn's story could have been a lot different. And I think that would be true for a lot of the women who are in prison today.
Another powerful story. Vicki.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Vicki Lopez, and I have been in this space probably since 2000. I began my work with girls in detention, really started to see how the violence in their lives was leading them into detention. And as you heard Kathryn say, they're more likely to be, detained if they're females. And it was an extraordinary experience to see their stories and to see how young they were, and to really understand, even in their very young lives, how much violence they'd already been, experiencing. And so in 2005, Governor Bush asked me to lead the work in Florida for prisoner reentry. We had so many people returning home from prison, and so many going back. And so we had to figure out, what was going on. And so, of course, I always operate with a gender lens, and really began to focus on the stories of women. And I really started looking at the similarities between the girls in detention and the women in prison. And it occurred to me that we could probably take the stories of women in prison back to the girls in detention to help stop the cycle, because these young girls had no idea that their trajectory, if they continued on, were going to lead to life sentences. And really some incredible lives were going to be lost, both innocent victims as well as their own, which was so important to me. And so really I discovered, after working for 2 years in the public policy arena, that there are a great deal of sort of circumstances, not only that lead women to prison, but that further aggravate their conditions while they're incarcerated. And then, as Mahlia very well knows, when they return home, we think that everything is peachy keen. And in fact, it's actually sometimes even worse because of the collateral sanctions that women, are faced with. And when they come home, they not only have all of the issues that women have, and 80% of the women have children, and they have been dispersed throughout the system or with family members. And so what we see a lot of is the struggle to just regain her position as their mother, and then have to figure out how to support herself and her children. So the work that Mahlia is doing in terms of helping to empower women, to be economically, stable, is an important story as well. So there'll be more on all of this, because I'll get into the impacts of children, but I'm so grateful to be here. Thank you so much, Marya and the Women's Fund, for hosting this very important discussion.
Thank you, Vicki. It's your Women's Fund. It's our Women's Fund. Vanessa, so grateful to have you here today to tell us about a program I just learned about 10 days ago. And thank you, Jamie, who's here listening, for teaching us.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. It's such an honor to be a part of this panel. I'm with Big Brothers and Big Sisters, as you can see, and we're a prevention program. And one of our programs that we have is that getting mentors for children of incarcerated parents with a history of incarceration. They don't have to be currently incarcerated, but if there's any history with a parent or even a sibling or themselves, then we try to provide mentors for them. And the mentors simply don't have to do much but be that additional person that a child can have to talk to about what they're dealing with, whether it be, sometimes they don't even know that their issues kind of stem from that history, but just having that person that's available to talk with them, be about whatever it is that they need to talk to, expose them to different things in life so that they make different decisions possibly about their life. Children who have mentors are more likely to finish high school, to do well, high school, go on to college. So we try to provide that for each child that wants it. If a parent, sometimes we have the issue of parents not wanting to admit the history of incarceration. So we're constantly trying to encourage them and help them to understand is nothing to be ashamed of. We all can move forward. Hearing Roslyn's story is really amazing to me, and the things that she's doing now, and hearing everybody. But we want to provide that for each child that wants it, and a parent, that's willing to receive that volunteer. I'm actually a big sister myself, and my little sister has family history of incarceration. I got matched with her when she was 5 years old, and now she's 17, going into her senior year next year and doing amazing. And not to brag, because I don't think I've done anything except be there for her, but just having that extra person to support her. She went through the same. Her grandmother was raising them because the paternal the parents were having drug abuse problems and all of that. So she was being raised by her grandmother. She and her other sibling. The grandmother passed away, and then they were adopted. But everything is working out. She's doing well, but not without having, those people to support her, the family member that adopted her, and having a big sister that she can talk to about anything. And it's been a great experience. And I'm so proud of what we do, trying to serve the children that have that history of incarceration.
Thank you. Thank you for all you do, speaking for everybody here. Thank you. Roz, we're to the part now we talk about, like, what are you seeing? Like, what are the biggest issues that you're seeing? And I know you have, some really specific advice and calls to action for us. What do we need to know?
So there's an underlying link between violence and incarceration. And it continues during and after imprisonment of women and girls. And I also want to put in there those who hold fluid identities. The majority of incarcerated women are Black, Indigenous people of color, whose past trauma is brought into the prison system. And often they experience similar violence as they did on the outside. Like I explained, my mother was a heroin addict and abused me emotionally and physically to the extent that I ran away from home and took the street life where drugs and, were prevailing in my life. And I didn't recognize this as trauma. It was not until prison that I became aware of the damage that was inflicted on me in childhood. as so many other women shared their stories in group settings. We all came from poverty-stricken communities where violence was everyday occurrence, whether it was fighting for your sibling for a piece of bread or survival on the streets. And in households where there's abusive partner, parent, or relative, and even in school, a lot of times our girls, go to school, and most young Black girls are considered with the stigma of being angry and sassy, and if they say something wrong to a teacher or somebody, they're criminalized. Um, Violence is everywhere. Also, many women come to prison with mental health issues, as many of the panelists talked about, and drug dependency, and a legacy of trauma that's passed down that was never addressed or treated before. Women are disproportionately impacted by prison and parole injustices as well. I personally have witnessed many of my friends who have transformed their lives in prisons and were ready to re-enter society, but they were denied parole because the basis of their crimes, which are mostly violent crimes. And oh, sorry, were mostly violent crimes. And they weren't eligible for parole because of the lengthy sentence that they were given. Also in prison, we have solitary confinement, and that is where a person is locked in a cell for 23 hours a day. The family separation, when you incarcerate a woman, you incarcerate the whole family. The kids can't unable to visit because the prison is too far away, or the cost of traveling is too expensive. There's horrible things that go on in prison. The strip searching, where you have to take off all your clothes and spread your cheeks and squat and cough in front of several other people and officers. It's just so much violence that is being in the prison system that is being implemented, and like people don't even really understand or know about it. Trans women and men are often ridiculed and shamed because they're different, and they're put into solitary confinement as well. um I really feel that we need to understand and look at violence from other institutions, like I said, such as the foster care system, child welfare system, hospitals, and even the military. Um, they all victimize women. The criminal justice system exploits poor and vulnerable people. Its emphasis is on law enforcement and punishment over treatment for substance abuse and throwaway attitudes towards persons with serious mental illness. Um, Misogyny as well. The push to incarcerate more women ignores the social and psychological forces that often underlie female offending, including the higher than average rates of a lifetime exposure to trauma, as well as physical and sexual victimization and untreated mental illness. I mean, the list could just go on and on. But
Our business to know. It's our
yeah,
business to know.
and upon release, women and girls face an uphill battle, as Mahlia said. Returning to the communities. They have health issues that weren't addressed prior to prison, weren't addressed in prison. Um, they're trying to get their kids back, and they're dealing with a system that just continues to abuse and create violence in their lives and separate them. There's not many halfway programs or shelter beds for women, and females coming home from incarceration have greater difficulty obtaining employment and housing. Like, I had a big problem with housing. I had to go through so much because I didn't understand what was involved. Like, I had to have a credit score that was 700 or better. I had to have a rent history, which I didn't have. I had to have employment for 2 years. And all of these things trapped me out from getting a job. And oftentimes what happens is, you get very discouraged. You get discouraged, and most of the time people turn back to what they used to do. hanging out on the streets, doing drugs, and ended up recidivist, you know?
In that next round, Ross, we'll go to some of those solutions and how you
Okay.
think you can
All
help
right.
to help with some of those. In the LEAP program, what are you seeing? I mean, Ross just gave us the most amazing list, and I'm sure there's even more. Mahlia, within what you're seeing with LEAP program, what would you add?
Well, I would ditto every single thing that Roslyn is saying, and she's doing awesome, partly because she's had a loving, supportive community. It is literally impossible, even with a job, even with education, 20 years after somebody's gotten out of prison, even with a 750 credit score, they cannot rent a place because of the background checks. And so it really takes a supportive community, and that includes not just those of us working in the social justice space. It requires the business community to really wake up to the value that returning citizens provide. And it's documented. There's a book that just came out called Untapped Talent that really gets into the statistics and the value of hiring returning citizens, but it's not enough just to hire them, because it's important to understand their background and the context. There has to be additional support to address the healthcare needs. I mean, when you think about in Florida, the fact that somebody, man or woman coming out of prison, gets $50, they're not considered homeless, so they don't qualify for places like Lotus House or Camilla's House. They, in Dade County, they don't even get a bus pass. They don't have a phone. They don't have clothing. So I would like for somebody to explain to me how coming out of prison with $50, how anybody is expected to survive. And it really does take a village. It's not enough just to say, here's a class or here's one thing. It requires a community that recognizes really the tragedy that has been inflicted on these people before they went to prison and during prison, and helping get them to a place where they can be successful and contributing members of our community, because I see it every day. If given the opportunity, there's so much that is possible, but just saying, oh, let me do this one thing is not enough. It really, and those of us here in the social justice space, it's not enough. And so when you talk about what can we do, we can really start to engage the business.
We'll get to that in the next round. which is perfect. So it's so important because this all builds on one another. So Vicki, so much has been covered.
Yeah.
What are you going to add? And we've got this 3 minutes, and then we'll go to the solutions, which is the most important part.
So I think I have a couple of slides that I just wanted to show. So here are the issues. Here are the key issues. We've got children of incarcerated mothers being in an extraordinarily high risk group of themselves going into prison. They have lots of instability as a result of it. Little evidence exists that, the consequences of parental incarceration for children differ between parents that are convicted of violent crimes or other nonviolent crimes. So they're all going to be impacted. Next slide. The challenges that you've been hearing, here's a list of them, and this is not even comprehensive, but this is what they faced prior to going into incarceration, right? So you heard Roz talk about victimization and unstable family life. Vanessa touched upon difficulties in school, limited work experience, financial issues, poverty, substance use disorders, mental health issues, a lack of vocational skills, believe it or not, and parenting difficulties. Well, those are the issues they faced prior to going to prison. The issues they're facing as they're coming home are legal issues, financial restitution, new trauma, re-traumatization that they experienced before they went in. So you see, it just is a complete cycle of trauma-informed kind of work. Next slide. And here's the trauma and addiction, right? Now, this is the biggest one. I actually have a client, Agape Network, who deals with women and their children. They're a residential treatment program as well as doing behavioral health treatment in the community. And when I sit with these women, this is the list that you could pretty much say is the profile, right? They've all had some mental health trauma-related incidences. Most of them have the co-occurring disorder of substance use disorder. They have a history of probably trafficking or having to, be a sex worker. they've had a lot of health concerns, which we don't really talk about a lot, but primary care is a huge sort of, I guess, a condition that you see before they come in, throughout the incarceration, and on the way out. And then they've got to deal with all of these reproductive health care, prenatal care, treatment for sexually transmitted diseases. I mean, this is stuff that this is real, and that very rarely get addressed. So these are just some of the issues. I don't think there's another, yes, correct. So that lays out for me some of the really strong issues that we need to look at, that have really been talked about by all the panelists. So I know that that's weaved in and out, but I worry a lot about primary care and how they're taking care of themselves, because that's certainly going to be a big issue for them when they return home.
It's so helpful as we go back and people get to use this Impact Collaborative as a resource. It's so helpful to have all that focus there. Vanessa, what are you seeing at Big Brothers Big Sisters in your own personal experience?
Some of the things I was just thinking about, and some of the things that we see, and I think which maybe one of the main issues is because stemming back to the parents not really letting most of the times the youth don't even know that they have that history of incarceration. So some of the things manifest and they don't even know. I think the parents don't realize that it will manifest itself at some point, possibly. And so even though the mentoring alone, sometimes it gives them that outlet, and they may eventually, and the youth are encouraged to talk about any issues. Our volunteers are not equipped to deal with deep mental health issues or deep issues that the youth may have, but we try to, as an agency, to provide some wraparound services if we see the need that the youth may have it. But I think it's just, you know, having those being able to have those conversations and being able to provide the wraparound services, because in most cases it's not really talked about, or the parents, like I said, we don't even have the confirmation that we're dealing with the youth that has a history of incarceration. So just trying to get parents and to understand that we're here to try to provide additional services for them when needed for the youth. And when things start to manifest, we hear some of the volunteers, they call us because we provide support during the whole duration of the match. We provide professional support. So if there are issues, usually they come up through the volunteer speaking with what we consider their program specialists, their match support specialist. It's the person that they call when things come up and they talk about it. So we're just trying to get to that point where we can get more dialogue about what's going on with the youth and why things are going on with the youth. And the youth don't even know why in most cases, they just know that it's happening.
Right. What's that self-identifying in any area of trauma? There's another poll going, but please let's go quickly to solutions. Roz, in 3 minutes, some solutions, and everybody's going to give us 3 minutes worth of solutions building on one another, and then we'll get to the Q&A, and it's so rich. So hit us with it, Roz.
So I just feel there is a dire need for services that address trauma prior, during, and beyond incarceration. And to identify, first we need to identify trauma and provide the services on an individualized basis. We have to invest in communities and have programs in the jails, in the prisons, in the courts that link together and provide support needed, and listen to the expertise of people impacted by the criminal justice system, whether it's a child, or family member, or anybody in the community. We need to be trauma informed and responsive on every level, and to have community-based programs groups for women with therapy, counseling, medical and mental health services to address these issues, as well as legal advocacy. Um, I could go on and on. Women empowerment groups, awareness, education building for around a culture of nonviolence, active participation in political systems as well, because a lot of times most people impacted by the criminal justice system are not involved in the political system. And these systems, the political systems, are the ones that create these laws that keep us down and criminalize us. So it's just a lot of things for direct services for survivors of domestic violence and victims, and even the perpetrators, because a lot of times people don't understand that they're in the cycle of abuse, and they just think that it's okay, like this is the norm and this is what it is and this is what I'm doing. We need to have think tanks on reimagining what a world without violence against women could look like. And I think the main thing about the think tanks is to get the youth involved, especially young men, because a lot of times the young men see their fathers abuse their women in society, and they feel like, oh, this is what a man is supposed to do. I'm a man. I'm supposed to abuse a woman. I'm supposed to beat her up. I'm supposed to have the control. We need to also get local legislation involved and support, and get on campaigns to change these laws that are holding us back and that are creating this violence. And also, I just want to bring into a mention too, the gay community, the LGBTQIA community too, experiences these things just as well. So, I mean, I could go on and on and on. It's
We,
just thing.
we will, and we thank you. Thank you, Roz. Mahlia, what do you got for us?
Well, I don't have much to add because Roz said it all. I think the foundational thing is to address the trauma, which it's very difficult to access those services. We do address it somewhat, but getting post-release one-on-one trauma counseling is essential. So I guess the two things I would add is what I started to discuss earlier about the importance of engaging the private sector need to be on board. And I personally view this as a matter of justice, but I think that part of the discussion goes beyond justice. So even if you don't care about justice, which we all do here, it is a matter of dollars and cents, whether it's the private sector, understanding that there's a labor shortage, and if they are going to survive, they need to meaningfully engage and consider returning citizens. And there needs to be, we need to join forces with the private sector to put pressure on our lawmakers, because what has been happening in Florida, whether it's the disenfranchising people with a record, to recent legislation that criminalizes basic things like protesting injustice. I think that we are a little bit of an echo chamber, those of us who are in the reentry space, and that people who don't really care from a matter of justice need to understand the billions of dollars that are being paid to perpetuate the system of injustice and mass incarceration. So we need to expand our circle of allies and advocates.
It is most definitely our business. It's most definitely our business. It's got to leave this village square and be amplified. So thanks to everybody who's with us today. Vicki.
Yeah, so I have a couple of slides on policy issues I think that need to happen. We've got to first address the underlying problems as an alternative to incarceration, which will likely benefit not only the woman, but her family. I tell a story of a young girl, apparently who was 4, and I was hosting a focus group in Overtown with some of the leaders there. And one of the women said to me, she was so taken by the fact that a little girl, when was asked where her daddy was, she said, "My daddy lives in the phone," because that was the only contact she had with her father. So she believed he actually lived inside the phone because that's where she heard his voice. So I think children losing their parents is a very difficult situation, but particularly for mothers. I think we have to, and you see, if Rosalind's circumstances had been addressed prior to her walking down that street with that woman, I'm going to tell you that Roz would not have served 39 years in prison. Because if we don't get it on the front end, you guys, we're talking about so many women that are in the system today. My thrust has always been to how, and that's why I think the work that Vanessa is doing is so incredibly important. We got to stop the cycle on the front end. We can't wait for them to get to prison and then address all this trauma. So for me, it's a lot about looking at the well-being of children of incarcerated parents, such as what Vanessa's doing. Obviously, the reduction of trauma and uncertainty related to address court processing and incarceration benefit children. Interventions that directly benefit the children of the incarcerated are likely to yield incredible benefits, as well as policies that decrease imprisonment and provide support to vulnerable families. Because you see, most of the women that are serving time in federal prison, and get this straight, they were living with a man, right? The man was really involved in the drug trade. She and her children were being supported by him. When the arrest comes because of the federal law, drug conspiracy laws, the guy is the guy that's got all of the substantial cooperation to give. So he gets a 2-year sentence and she gets a 15-year sentence. It's just the way it works. She was just happened to have been living with this guy. Often she wasn't even involved in the drug trade. So she and her children were impacted by that. Next slide. Here's some reentry policies that I have been working on. Women are currently receiving the same services as men. And quite frankly, there has to be some more gender specific programming for women to talk about how their reentry is very different than male reentry. So I'm looking for gender responsive criminal justice approaches that acknowledge their pathways are different as well as their reentries are different. I also want to see some gender specific programming supporting transitions from correctional facilities to the community. And by that, I mean, look, women are sometimes housed very far away from their families. In order for her to have a seamless transition home, she should already begin the transition home while she's behind the walls. By that, I mean the reunification of families, making contact already with faith-based communities to help support her when she comes home. Also to have businesses who hire ex-offenders start the process while they're inside. I think that would help her feel very much more stable when she returns home than, as Mahlia said, with $50 in her pocket and absolutely no reentry whatsoever, nowhere to go, nowhere to see hopefulness, if you will. So, there's racial and ethnic disparities, which are huge. We don't look at culture when we're looking at reentry programs as well. We don't look at women's relationships. I mean, I told Marya a story about a warden who said to me, listen, I'd much rather supervise men than women because y'all are so complicated. And I thought that was curious because, as women, I don't consider ourselves complicated. I do understand our relational sort of approach to life. We're in relationship with everything. And I think that has to be really, taken into account. And of course, the trauma that's been spoken about here, as well as the substance use disorders, I think are important. And there might be just one more slide. And this is it. Housing is super important to these women, but they have to be distanced away from where the abuse relationships are. She's going to need some transportation to get to work and get her children to somehow a daycare center. She's going to need clothing, you guys. I mean, she's coming out with, sometimes she's coming out with the clothes that were sent back in several years ago. I mean, depending on how long she's been down. There is income and employment, which Mahlia has already spoken about. Simple things like an ID, things you don't stop to think about, right? Because you naturally have a driver's license in your pocketbook, but she doesn't. And so she needs that. And of course, any kind of education, whether that be vocational training skills or a GED. I can't tell you how many women go behind bars and don't even have that and return home. And what are their prospects if they haven't been able to utilize the time that they have been behind the walls fruitfully to get education that will help. So those are the kind of things that I think we need to be working on.
Super helpful. Vanessa.
First of all, it amazes me the kind of funding that's put into building prisons and imprisoning men and women. And then when it's time for them to come out and try to change their lives, there's not many resources out there, not much funding out there. Because that's one of the things even that I think would help. I don't have much to add, is that we have some funding source, more funding for those purposes of programs to help provide services for those families, for those children that come out of that are in those family situations where the parent is coming out and then they need to re-enter society and be able to function, because they will go back and they'll go to the old sources and do the old things that they do. And this is what the children are seeing. So that's where we're running into those issues. So just some services. I know that there's not many programs when we're looking for resources for the families that are dealing with some issues. So I really would love to see some of that happening, some resources, some funding for that.
So important, Vanessa, so important. Thank you. Kathryn, we're gonna ask you to join us for the Q&A. And Gato, while people are doing this poll, I'm gonna ask you to post how people will be able to see the replay on our Impact Collaborative tab on the Women's Fund Miami.org website, because I'm getting messages from all different kinds of places of people who, want to share it or want to see a portion that they have to miss. So thank you so much for that. So I'm going to go to the first question that Lionel has asked for us. Excuse me, there we go. Lionel asks, are there more negative influences in poor communities than positives? And is that does this have to do with poverty in those communities? Who'd like to take that question?
I'll speak about it.
Go ahead, Roz.
So, Lionel, thanks for your question. And what happens in poor communities is that, I don't know if everybody knows about redlining. Okay, they set out a certain area in certain communities for poor people or marginalized people, and they are forced to live in these areas, and these areas are mostly run down, not taken care of. You have a liquor store on every other corner. You have no resources in your community in that area to go to. Most of them are housing projects where people live in. The quality of life is very poor. The quality of food is very poor. So you put all of that together, and I think we can make an educated decision on it that yes, these places do not provide any means for people to advance, any means for people to get better, any means for people to get help. And what happens in these communities is crime. You have the police presence in these communities because they're viewed as, the worst of the worst, monsters, all these predatory names that are given to people that live in poor communities. So yes, it is disproportionate, and it plays a big impact on how people live their lives.
I can also follow up with that.
Yeah,
Marya.
please.
I did a lot of work in 10 very poor communities. And what I found was that there was really a very, very large lack of resources. And for those who already had a criminal justice interaction, if you will, there was the problem of actually getting a job because of the criminal history, right? So right now I serve on the board of the Miami-Dade Greater Miami Chamber of Commerce, and we're going to initiate a Ban the Box initiative. We understand that criminal history is an important thing to discuss during a job interview, but we believe it should be during the job interview and not before the person gets a chance to play on a level playing field, right? Because, now the applications actually say, have you ever been arrested? As if that's even a criminal charge. So it's arrested. Have you been convicted of a misdemeanor? Have you been convicted of a felony? And most often, if you check that because you're trying to be honest, chances of you getting an interview are going to be slim to none. So, in these communities, it's almost like a vicious cycle, right? You want to get a second chance. Look, I interviewed so many inmates in the years that I've been doing this work. And I can tell you, for the most part, everyone understands that they've made a huge mistake and they're trying to turn their lives around. The very reason why we call it second chances. But it's hard to get a second chance, especially in the poor neighborhoods, because there aren't enough resources. There's not enough jobs. There's no transportation. There's hardly even a grocery store in the poor neighborhoods. So you see, it's just kind of a vicious cycle that just keeps feeding itself. And I just wanted to make sure that we realize that it's far more than just, they're living poor. They don't even have a chance.
I would like to add something as well. I mean, I think both Roslyn and Vicki are spot on. But as a sociologist, I want to, add that, right, when we take a step back and think about, we're talking so much about trauma and violence against women, and we're talking about it in the context of mass incarceration, but women everywhere experience violence, right? Women in all communities, rich and poor, experience violence, right? But there's a particular reason why women in poorer communities, end up, right, sort of that leads them to involvement in the criminal justice system. And those are things like, resources, right, within that community. And that has to do with historical context, which Roslyn touched onto, why we have, such high inequalities between, our poor communities and our resource-rich communities, right? And, I just wanted to give mention of, y'all hadn't heard of the $1 Million Block Project, which actually goes and identifies city blocks where we spend over $1 million a year incarcerating residents on that block, right? $1 Million Block projects. And think about, right, if we could take half of that money and put it towards, more higher quality education, access to jobs with livable wages, right? Treatment for trauma, taking a reinvestment approach to, like, if we can take this money that we're spending on the system of injustice, to use Rosalind's words, and invest it in community structures and invest it in organizations, that are doing the work of trying to transform communities, right? In Miami, we have, the Dream Defenders, we have Circle of Brotherhood, right? That are working in communities to create change from within. And if we support those organizations and we shore up, right, these structures in communities that have been historically, right, marginalized and discriminated against, and their social structures have been decimated, then that will help alleviate from, like, a prevention standpoint, right, which is, what we're all kind of talking about. That could go a long way in thinking about, like, what can we do? And so I just wanted to add that to the already great comments.
I have to ask our Women's Fund board members who are on here, and Viviana, especially from our staff, who we're working, as many of you know, and some of you don't know, we're working on putting together a dashboard on the status of women and girls in our community to understand where those gaps and needs are and trying to get some mapping going on. Can we add $1 Million Block, please, to our understanding and that lens? I didn't know that before today, Kathryn. And there's got to be no question that we've got $1 Million Blocks. Can I ask you, do we have those in Miami identified?
So I'm going to be honest, it's been a while since I've looked at the $1 Million Block Project, and I can't remember. I know they have, like, cities like New York and Chicago and Houston. I don't know if they've done Miami yet. I can find out. But if not, then that's something that, maybe we can work with them on.
Well, and Marya, when at the Governor's Ex-Offender Task Force actually got the Urban Institute to map where in Miami-Dade people are coming home to most often. And it is Liberty City, Model City, right? That what I call the 4 census tracts here. And we modeled then on top of that, where the kids were getting arrested, same households. I mean, it was striking to see how you could see a parent coming home from prison, and then right in that same house, 2 of her kids were already in the system, right? In the juvenile system. So I can't stress enough what Roz said about not ignoring programs for men in prison that deal with violence against women. I cannot stress this enough. These men are sitting there, and some of them have been down for a long time. My suggestion is that when I have sat in on groups with men who are really working on reunification with families, on, you know, kind of the, like I call it, the 12-step program, where you have to go back and try to figure out all the people that you've wronged. It was always the most powerful discussion when they could talk about how they'd been violent with their wives, mothers, sisters. And honestly, those are the programs that will have the biggest impact in these communities when these men come home. Because if we don't address what brought them to the violence, right? As Roz says, you have or as I don't know if it was Vanessa, but when you know that the only role model you have is your father who's been doing it, you think it's okay. We have to break the cycle with them as well. It's the only way, in my opinion. And the more I talk to the men, the more I realize there's hope if we get them the right services to really, you know, start working on their own violence. What led them to violence? Why are they violent? And let's stop that cycle too.
In our village square here today, we have amazing folks. So not only the people from Big Brothers Big Sisters, but there are people here from PACE, from Strong Girls, and so many other programs. It's amazing that all of you do. So clearly, Vanessa, you already said funding, right? I'm certain that all the programs and program providers who are here today are not fully funded. So Vanessa, can you address a little bit, like, is Big Brothers Big Sisters, do you have enough to run the specific program? Is it in all corners of Miami-Dade?
Well, we cover Greater Miami, so the funding is through Department of Juvenile Justice. So that's the only funding source that we have per se that's targeted towards serving children with a history of incarceration. Could we definitely use more funding? Absolutely, you know, to provide services, maybe other services that we can provide to those youth, to those families. So funding, I think, as long as we are doing things the way that we do in society, it's going to always be an issue of not having enough funding to do what we really, really need to do.
Amazing. Vicki, thank you for doing what I was going to do. I was going to ask Rachel if she was going to ask her question. She did post a little something before, but if you do have a question, Rachel, please do put it either the Q&A or here in the chat, because we've got a couple of minutes left. But I do want to ask, questions come in from a couple different places. Kathryn, are there best practices in other cities and other counties, or to any of the panelists, but best practices or programs that we don't have here, or studies that we need to be implementing that we need to be made aware of?
Yeah, so I think that there's a lot more that we could be doing in Miami to sort of understand, you know, what's going on, how to best fund organizations. I know in Miami, there's groups that are looking to, you know, create participatory budgeting, right? So the citizens of Miami have more control over how the county budget is determined. And I think, you know, supporting that, which has been successful in other cities, right? If we, you know, think about allocation, we're talking about funding for services, like that funding has to come somewhere, which means you have to decrease it from other places, right? And so if we could take, you know, funding from, you know, say policing, right, which has, you know, these huge budgets, or we could take them from these other places to invest in other sectors. You know, I think that that's something that we've seen examples of, as I mentioned, in other cities. That we could be doing here. And I know that that's like a grassroots movement here in Miami to establish participatory budgeting. And so that's one thing that immediately comes to mind. And I also want to, someone had mentioned earlier, primary care. I think that was Vicki, talked about healthcare and primary care. So one of the things that I'm trying to do is establish a transitions clinic here. So, we don't have good healthcare services for people that are leaving corrections and returning to our community. In many cities, there is a best practices model, the Transitions Care Network, that provides community clinics, free clinics, specifically for people that are leaving prison and jail with chronic health conditions that need to be managed. And so Miami does not have one. And I think that that's another really easy, fundable thing, right? It uses formerly incarcerated peer community health workers to help people navigate the system and provide that support that Mahlia is talking about, right? They'll go pick them up if they need to, from the bus, from the jail, take them out to eat, and help them reorient into the world, in addition to meeting their healthcare needs, right? People come out, they don't have medications, they don't have healthcare because healthcare is tied to employment in our country, right? And so being able to address people's health needs can also go a long way. And I think that that's something that's sorely missing from Miami as well.
Amazing. Such a rich morning, and there's so much to contemplate and to review. I'd like to give each of you the opportunity to give us a call to action. It doesn't have to be the most mind-blowing one. It could be like Mahlia's, like, come and shop at the Dragonfly, where I've gotten a couple of my favorite pieces of jewelry, by the way. So each of you, please, would you like to offer a call to action, large or small, for us to take away? Who'd like to start?
There's so many. Somebody else go first so I can pick one or two.
I'll go, Marya. I think the stigma of criminal histories is still a very, I think it's prevalent. I think we have to do more. So if you are in your community, for those of you that are serving women who are exiting prison, remind them that it is okay to tell their story, because we are as strong as the stories that are being told. And I think we've got to, really recognize that there's nothing to be ashamed of, right? You're not your story. You're what you've made of that story, right? And there's so much richness in how they are faring, the successes that they are having. But otherwise, remember that you are in the grocery store, and she might be she might be the teller at the bank. She might be the person who is checking you out. You don't know what they look like, right? You don't know who they are. So encourage people, talk about it. Say, I learned about this today, and it strikes me so deeply that women are being victimized in so many ways, and we need to do our share. So the more that we tell stories and the more that we tell people about what we've learned here, I think it's helpful for the community, right? Because we need to open hearts around this. Everyone deserves a second chance, for God's sakes. And many of us, got it, right? And we didn't have to, suffer through all the things that Roz had to. But I do believe that just saying to yourself, look, everyone deserves a second chance if they're working towards that. And we're here to help.
Who's next?
I wanted to just say, for people to get to know women inside, like if you could go to your local jails or your prisons and find through your faith-based organizations to reach out to the women in prison and get to know them, because at the end of the day, it all boils down to we all want the same things out of life. And also there are programs, I know in New York, there are plenty of nonprofit organizations that were started by formerly incarcerated men and women because they saw the need in their community to heal their community. And look for these organizations and support them with funding or support them with volunteering and giving them your time and energy. And like Vicki said, pass the word. You were here today, you heard my story, you heard the information, you heard the date, the data, you saw, the PowerPoints of all the information that was here is going to be available to you. Share it with your friends and families, because a lot of times we preach to the choir in these circles, and it needs to go further. People need to understand, and people need to know that this is a human rights activist that we're doing. You know, people that are formerly incarcerated, that are impacted by the justice system, we need to be heard and seen so the world can come together and we can all heal. Thank you.
So for in terms of immediate action, 2 days ago, LEAP graduate Angela was released from prison. We picked her up. We drove her to probation. We've driven her to Camilla's. She's got her license. This afternoon, she's in our LEAP house. We have a transitional home. This afternoon is her first day at work at the Dragonfly. You could go by there and give her a hug. I know she would be receptive to it. She's been texting me. Our store manager is happy to tell you her story. She's a LEAP graduate. Every person there, except for my daughter who is working there, she just left. Every person there is formerly incarcerated. And in terms of really, my favorite thing to do is to go to prison. We offer opportunities for people in our community. We have mentor days where we go into the prison, we have one day we're talking about feasibility for their business plan or marketing, but all of those topics are pretenses for connecting, because the woman that I coached and mentored, Cafe, who Marya knows and everybody who knows LEAP knows, she's on our board now. She was in prison for 7 years and not one person ever visited her. And she is now a major contributor to our community. She works at Camilla's Health. She works helping women who are on the streets, who are victims of sex trafficking. So in Miami, LEAP offers plenty of opportunities to personally connect with women. And we also offer many other opportunities to be able to be of service, ranging from fundraising, which of course is always a challenge, but to also being able to personally connect. Because once you connect with these ladies, it's like the LEAP vortex. You want to be there. I mean, because all of us get much more out of being of service, at least to the women that we serve, than they ever get from us. So we have lots of ways that you can connect in this space, and I invite you to reach out.
Vanessa.
Hi. I think my one call to action is that we have more people that are willing to volunteer and get involved with agencies like Big Brothers and Big Sisters or any of the other agencies. Everybody here on this panel that try to provide a service, don't be afraid, because it's nothing to be afraid of. It's people, everyday people that just need our help. And so my thing is just please be willing to help and volunteer.
Kathryn.
Yeah, I think everyone has made just such good suggestions so far. I just wanted I put a link in the chat to make people aware of the National Council for Incarcerated and Formerly Incarcerated Women and Girls and their Free Her campaign. And so that's another organization that people can get involved with to help support women and change how we treat women in the United States with regards to incarceration. And so, I think the call to action to support policy that comes through, to show up, email representatives and let them know that you support these things. To speak, to talk to your friends, speak to people in your networks, and to volunteer and support organizations that are doing the work and leading the way. And so I think those are some small actionable things that people can take today, in addition to shopping at the Dragonfly, which everyone should definitely go and check out.
Showing up, you said it, and you all showed up with such huge selves today, and everybody who came today, you're the ones who show up. And this is our business. We need to focus on these things. We need to understand, and we need to amplify. Our team, Vivian Caro, bless your beautiful hearts, have got information here on how you can join up to join us, the Women's Fund Impact Agents Volunteer Corps, and I'll stay super connected. And if you connect here the first Thursday of every month, there's going to be something on economic mobility, on leadership for women, on health and well-being, or freedom from violence. And they're all interdigitated, and they all work together. Those strong pillars support women and girls in our community. And they're amazing people here to do that work, but there's a lot of work to do. So thank you all for showing up, and we will see you definitely, we hope, on July 1st. Your feedback's important because we use it. So please fill out the survey, because data is important. It will be used. And this one, I think, affects today's topic as well, childcare. Whose business is it? So thank you. We'll see you here next time, and share the recording for those who couldn't be here.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Roz, Vicki, Vanessa, Mahlia, Kathryn.
Thank you.
Thank you. You know, if there's so many people here, like Strong Girls, PACE, all these colleagues, there's so many people who are taking stuff and running with it, and people are texting me, I need to know, I need to go. People are texting me, I gotta go to Dragonfly. I've got like, where do we meet? How do we follow up on this? We need to give this to our advocacy committee. For a bunch of our board members have been on here participating today. And so the Women's Fund has a new advocacy committee, which I think, is it official, Vicki, that you're?
Yes, I'm part of it. Yes,
Yay,
I am very excited. Excited. Very
We've
excited.
already got some, I think we need to take this back
Definitely.
to the advocacy committee and to the research committee, and you can help us give tips on this. Okay, so you all care. This is what you can do, and then we keep on sharing those things on our website. And some of the people here today can find out things on our website, and then we can integrate that into our grant making. And we say we need more research on this because we know it because everybody here on the call is telling us, but we don't have the data to prove that to the policymakers or to the money talkers, right?
Right.
Yeah. Vanessa, I'm going to come and visit you all soon.
Please do.
Gail's got me set up.
Oh yeah.
Come and visit.
Oh yeah. You have a date already?
We had a date, but then he got another date in between. So I think we've got a redate, but I can't remember exactly which one it was. But we've been meeting on Zoom a little bit.
Wait to see you in person.
Roslyn, what a beautiful person you are, and what a courageous person you are. Listen, I can't even imagine 39 years. I always tell everybody, you just got to spend one day and multiply that. And it's just harsh. So I'm just so grateful for the work you're doing up in New York, and for for everything that you've done for us today. Your story was incredibly impactful. And I know that it changed a couple of people's hearts, but it also inspired.
I hope so. I really do.
Yes, ma'am. Beautiful work. And Vanessa, thank you for all the work you're doing with children, for goodness sakes.
You're welcome.
Go girl, it's on that side. I am telling you. I keep saying to everyone, we need to be looking at what's happening to girls and boys. If boys understand the way to really operate, they will not, we can stop this. I don't want to wait until Roslyn hits the walls. I don't want to wait for Mahlia to have to say to me, these women have been traumatized inside. I mean, it's absurd. It's absurd. There's a way to do this.
Absolutely.
So front end work.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, I've got to jump off. Oh, Ross, thank you so much.
Thank you all so much. And I think my information, I put it in the chat. If anybody wants to connect, I'm going to connect, and we can figure out more things to do and move this forward. And Kathryn, I am also a member of the National Council, and I've been to all the Free Her conferences, and I know Andrea James and her family and everything. They do amazing work. Yeah. So thank you all, and take care.
Thank
Likewise,
you, Roz. We know where you live and your kitty cat too.
That's where he's sleeping.
I have a feeling you're going to get another request for another speaking
No problem.
engagement out of this.
Oh,
Always
I've already recruited Roz, like the deal is done. We have
Oh,
we have
God.
our own advisory committee of, it's a leadership advisory committee that helps inform our programming decisions, and Roz is now on it.
Right, take care. Nice meeting everybody.
Say hi to Lisa. Lisa's listening on the phone, Roz. You know Lisa? From the
Hi.
state board who got me into all this stuff.
Yes,
She's on here too. On the phone.
Right.
Thank you so much, Roz.
Bye.
Wonderful
And
day,
Vicki.
you all.
Bye, everyone.
Thank